one of the things I'll point out is that the closer that a poet comes to working in what we might call the poetry of witness, poetry that has to do with talking about social justice issues or about personal experience of racism or sexism, things like that, you'll find that that poet needs to use something that more closely approximates prose. It's just a natural byproduct of seeking to testify to some reality that's going on in the world. And today I'm not going to present you with any answers. I'm going to present you with a number of questions. I hope you'll take a look at that. I suppose that's kind of the Socratic method, very old-fashioned way of doing a little bit of talking and instructing. But let me start with this essay that I wrote for the Poetry Society Virginia newsletter. And it's available there, but I'm going to read it. It's very quickly done. And it will set the topic for what I'm going to be chatting with you about today. What is poetry today? The honest answer to the question I proposed, if you're engaged with reading widely and adventurously in the poetry currently being published and reviewed, seems to be this: poetry just might be anything. We've seen Citizen and American Lyric, the striking collection by Claudia Rankine, nominated for the National Book Critics Circle Award in 2 categories, poetry and criticism, something both unprecedented and controversial. The book is described by its publisher, Grey Wolf's Jeffrey Schatz, this way: it compels both the wider reader and the critical reader. It is poetry, it is essay, it is autobiography, it is cultural criticism, it is illustrated text. You see where that part comes from. There's one chapter in here that is the transcript of what you just heard Claudia Rankine reading, and I'm not sure I can find it very quickly, but across the bottom of the page you see the stills from this video, and that's displayed across the bottom of the page. So now you know a little bit more about this than most readers who go into the book even know about. Okay. And I've just talked about all this. So the script for that video, this video, appears along with miniatures of the video's images under the title World Cup, there we go, in Rankine's prize-winning book of what? Poetry. Schatz argues that the book's complex subject matter, a multifaceted examination of race in America, requires a matching complexity of forms, and that does make sense, even as her poetry collection essentially obliterates genre boundaries that were indeed already blurred. It is an amalgam of forms, and so it is in multiple ways. Ultimately, as well as ironically, the subtitle is An American Lyric. So it's a new definition, a new reconfiguration of what an American lyric might be. Earlier debates regarding poetry versus prose and prose poetry. My teacher, Dave Smith, used to say, prose poetry, it's neither. And he was wrong. I love the guy, but he was wrong. Besides, because the King James Bible is poetry. It's prose poetry. Sorry, it's a really old thing, right? It's been around for a while. It's not a newfangled idea. Charles Baudelaire wrote prose poetry. Yeah, okay, not a new thing, not a new thing. So earlier debates regarding poetry versus prose, or the old battles over narrative versus lyric poetry, seem rather quaint by comparison. Besides, the division some postmodern writers and critics still like to draw between lyric and narrative poetry always was, for the most part, a false dichotomy. Those well-worn terms have been waved about as the tattered battle flags in a kind of political/aesthetic combat that generates much heat but little light. All lyric poems are rooted in a narrative of some kind, no matter how obscured or compressed or unreal. And poems that have a narrative thread always do have the potential for the same intensities and artistry often associated with their lyric. This is an old sore subject for me because one time during my teaching career, one of my students came to me and said, "You don't understand my poetry because I'm a lyric poet and you're a narrative poet." And that really pissed me off. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Well, I don't even understand. So I put together an entire class, a whole semester studying this question. And I can tell you categorically and authoritatively, it's a phony dichotomy. There is no division. Just like the division between prose and poetry gets mighty hard to find out what's going on. Aren't there a lot of poets today practicing creative nonfiction writing? And isn't their writing highly poetic? And when you read it, don't you run across passages that say, oh, that really sounds like poetry to me? My wonderful colleague, Harrison Candelaria Fletcher, read his books. And you'll find that there are passages in there that are just as beautiful and intense and wonderful as any poetry. So these boundaries are breaking down, and they never were safe, because all the way back, they weren't safe.